Welcome to USFL Today, the schedule release edition. I'm your host, Angelo Fiouris. Make sure you follow USFL Today on Twitter at USFL Today. Head over to YouTube at USFL Today. Subscribe to our channel. Set your notifications so you don't miss any episodes. We've got a bunch of shows coming out over the next few weeks and a few new ones in development that you're going to enjoy. Also follow our New Jersey Generals account at NJ_Generals and subscribe to that feed because you never know what kind of information is going to get broken there, such as the opening game being Generals at Birmingham Stallions, which we were able to break for you a couple of weeks ago in advance of today's big release date. Let's talk about this release day today. It was very exciting, I thought, beginning at 8 o'clock this morning, East Coast time. And let's give a round of applause to the USFL social media team. They have taken quite a bit of criticism over the last year or so for producing, let's be honest, rather cookie cutter looking stuff. Nothing really spectacular out of the social media team over the last year, but today really topped it. I mean, you're talking about creativity, you're talking about funny, you're just talking about great ideas across the board. Every one, I thought, of the schedule release videos, which premiered, I guess, one every hour over the course of 8 hours, were all fantastic. They all had something really funny, special, or interesting about them. However, my top three, and let's say this is in no particular order, I'm going to say I enjoyed the Pittsburgh Maulers video. I think mostly because of the music. I enjoyed the Stallions video. I think just because of the way it started with the Stallion kicking the General, and then it went from there. And maybe the one I liked the most was the New Orleans video with all the different waves and attacks and tsunami type fate befalling each of the Breakers' opponents. So that was a good one too. They were all good. Not saying one's better than the other, but those were my three favorite for sure. So I hope that this is just a glimpse into what the USFL social media team has in store for us moving forward for the rest of the season, because this is going to be hard to top, and they're going to have to produce at the same kind of level with at least some of the bigger news as the season wears on. But I thought it was great, and here's hoping the rest of the season is equally as entertaining from the social media side of the USFL. Also, I think you're going to start seeing other leagues revealing their schedules in more creative ways than just like five talking heads at a desk talking about week one, week two, and so on. So great stuff, and kept everybody entertained. We were definitely all talking about it and tweeting and texting about it throughout the morning and early afternoon. Let's look at some team-by-team schedule highlights, shall we? We'll start with the Michigan Panthers, who are opening on the road against Houston. That's a noontime start in Memphis, Tennessee. And then, of course, against Philadelphia on the 23rd in Detroit. Technically, it says at Philadelphia, but of course, we know the game's in Detroit. So from there, they're playing New Jersey, they're hosting Memphis, they're hosting Pittsburgh, and then they're hosting Birmingham. So a stretch of 5 games in a row, actually, at Ford Field. And then they wrap up with 3 of their last 4 games on the road. And the final game is a game against Philadelphia, a hub versus hub battle to close out the year. I also noticed that the schedule was written in such a way that it is hub versus hub, where if one team is playing in Memphis, the hub partner is also playing in Memphis, and so on and so forth. So probably done to save on travel, maybe. I'm not sure, but it looks like it makes sense, and it helped balance out the schedule. So another good idea by the USFL to package the teams together and move them around from place to place each weekend. Let's move on to the next schedule, shall we? We'll take a look at the Pittsburgh Maulers. The Maulers have an interesting schedule. They do open up against New Orleans. That's in Birmingham. Then it's right back to Canton to kick off the Canton regular season slate versus the Generals, a noontime start on the 23rd of April. Some other highlights of the Maulers schedule. They wrap up the season with 4 straight games at home. Well, 4 straight games in Canton against Philly, Houston, Michigan, and then the final game against the Generals. Them and the Pittsburgh Maulers and the New Jersey Generals are the only teams who have 4 straight games in their home hub to wrap up the season. So the newly gold and black of the Maulers, newly minted gold and black of the Pittsburgh Maulers, looking for a whole new outlook, and maybe 4 straight games with no travel will help them. We shall see. It's going to be interesting. On to the defending champion, Birmingham Stallions, who begin their season the same way they did last year with a league opening affair, hosting the New Jersey Generals, and as defending champions this time. And they get to start their season with 3 straight home games, which equals a total of 13 when you go back to last year's 10 regular season games. Then they wrap up with a split, 2 at home and 2 on the road. They see, aside from the 3 straight home games, they kind of have like the most balanced remaining schedule out of everybody, with 3 at home and 4 on the road. Moving over to the New Jersey Generals schedule, as we just said, they host or they're hosted by the Birmingham Stallions on opening night, and then they go to Pittsburgh for week 2. And again, same type of schedule as the Maulers, where they wrap up with 4 straight in Canton. This is with Michigan, Memphis, Philadelphia, and then Pittsburgh. I certainly hope that the league avoids a repeat matchup in week 11 as there was in week 10. I really didn't like the Generals and the Stars playing each other on back-to-back weeks last year. I don't think a lot of people liked it. The simple answer to avoid that would have been 1 versus 2 cross division as the semifinal matchup, but the league knows what they're doing, I guess. Let's take a look at the Memphis Showboats, who, by the way, if you haven't seen just the graphic of their schedule, it's probably the best one out of all of them. It just, I don't know, it features Todd Haley. It's pretty sharp. It's got a cool background. Their colors are cool. The Showboats have a schedule where they open up at home against the Stars on opening weekend. Then they are playing the Stallions in Birmingham a week later. They wrap up their schedule. The back half of the Memphis schedule is home game heavy, not quite as dominant as the Generals and the Maulers schedule, but you're looking at 4 out of their last 5 games being at home in Memphis. Those 2-2 sandwiched around a week 8 affair against New Jersey. Memphis, by the way, wraps up hosting Birmingham. Imagine that game being for the South Division title. That would be pretty cool. The Philadelphia Stars, last year's league runner-up, they have, I feel like, one of the tougher schedules, and that's simply because of the way their games are spread out. They start out with a road game, and then they're in Detroit to face their hub mate, the Michigan Panthers, and then hosting Pittsburgh the week after that. But the part that's daunting to me is the last 4 games of the season. They wrap up last month of the year in Canton to face the Maulers, in Birmingham to face the defending champion Stallions, back to Canton to play New Jersey, and then finally back to Detroit to wrap up against the Michigan Panthers in a definite home game. And if there's a playoff spot on the line, I expect that they'll have a nice vocal crowd that night. So in essence, hub or not, the Stars are wrapping up with 4 straight road games to end the season. A bit unfair by the USFL schedule maker, if you ask me. Let's talk about the New Orleans Breakers. Their schedules spread out a little bit differently than everybody else. They start out hosting Pittsburgh. They start out hosting Houston, and then they finally are 3 games all in Birmingham before they have to hit the road and go to New Jersey for week 4. They wrap up their schedule looking at the back half with 2 games in Birmingham and then 2 games heading to Memphis and wrapping up against Houston, also in Memphis. So their last 2 games are in Memphis, making for less travel at least, which is one of the hardest parts of being on the road, right? Now I wonder though, will the league make them go back to their hub in between? to Birmingham, or will they just stay in Memphis? It's not that far, I guess, between Memphis and Birmingham. So we'll see how all that shakes out. We're just kind of talking here anyway. That none of this is substantiated, right? Then we move on. Last but not least, to the Houston Gamblers. The Gamblers schedule was the last one to be released. I thought that their video was super cool. All of the different gambling and craps and dice and cards. I love that kind of stuff. And I thought it was a pretty cool schedule in that regard. The Gamblers finish up with 4 out of 5 in their hub home stadium without any travel. Their one trip is in the middle, where they head to Canton to play the Maulers in the back half of the season. But for the Gamblers, the harder part of the year is the first half, where 3 of their first 5 games are away from their hub home. They'll be in Birmingham, play New Orleans, then they head to Detroit to face Philadelphia, and then back to Birmingham again to face the Stallions. So that is the highlights of the Houston Gamblers 2023 schedule. One of the things that were not revealed during the schedule release today was what TV networks are going to be scheduling which games. Obviously, the start times had a lot to do with TV dictating when these games are going to be played, because they have to be slotted to be fit into TV schedules, right? That's a big factor. So where are these games going to be shown? Which ones are on Fox? Which ones are on NBC? Hopefully very few are on USA, and hopefully even fewer are on Peacock. I hope that Peacock is not part of it, mostly because, who wants to hear people constantly complaining about Peacock for 10 weeks? So hopefully the league gets it off of that platform and puts it on all the services that everyone's able to get. It'll be much more fan friendly if they do that anyway. Why turn people off at this point, right? I agree. So looking ahead, obviously the playoffs are in Canton as well, which is which bodes very well for the Generals and the Pittsburgh Maulers, because if either one of those get into the playoffs, they're looking at 5 and possibly even 6 straight games in their home hub without having to travel. So that's a pretty solid outcome for either one of those two things. Another interesting nuance about the Michigan Panthers schedule is they have 3 of their games are in conflict with Detroit Tigers games taking place literally right next door, and they share parking. And so with one of the games, there's a couple of hours difference between first pitch and opening kickoff. But as was pointed out by Panthers Shadow on Twitter, the other 2 games are starting within like a half an hour or an hour of each other, I think. And so that is going to be, what kind of situation is that going to be like? If large crowds come out for a Panthers game, typically early season baseball crowds are bigger, especially on a weekend, than they are later, especially if the team's off to a good start. So that's going to be interesting to see what kind of mess or not gets created by the Detroit Tigers and the Michigan Panthers sharing space and having schedules roughly around the same time as each other. Let's wrap it up by talking about the rather abrupt coaching change the other day, which led to Jeff Fisher stepping down, quickly replaced by Mike Nolan. Seems like this was probably in the works for a while. Probably explains why Fisher wasn't in Detroit for the press conference a couple of weeks ago when Detroit was announced. And Mike Nolan now stepping in time for what we think is going to be a USFL draft on February 21st. That's the date I've been hearing. And if so, at least they have the new coach in place so that he can select or be in charge of selecting some of the players that the team will be bringing into camp with them. Speaking of camp, we're only about 5 weeks away, with coaches reporting somewhere around the 13th of March. And now I'm hearing from some sources that players are reporting on the 16th of March, not the 18th as originally reported. We'll see how all that shakes out. I'm not sure exactly if that is official or not just yet. So don't quote me on that one, but just something I'm hearing through the grapevine. That wraps it up for this week's edition of USFL Today Game Plan. I'm glad you joined me. I hope you enjoyed this. I enjoyed putting it on. It was a lot of fun. And we'll do this again. Going to be doing it every week. That's the new show. It's called USFL Today Game Plan. I'll be having a co-host with me. Just didn't work out that way tonight, but that's okay because I love flying solo too. We will see you next time. Thanks a lot.